Hi everybody, good morning. What I'm going to do here today is I have an acrylic painting that I'm going to make, and it's of the fish that you can see here in my photo. Now I have also got some materials where I'm using acrylic paint, but you can use whatever paint you have available or any other colouring material as well. You can do lots of similar effects with other materials. I have a mixing plate, I have a cloth, I have plastic sheets, cellophane, an old scrumpled up piece of sellotape, and I'm going to experiment with those for later. A water jar, a cocktail stick, I have an earbud, I have a selection of different size brushes. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a big brush like this, and I'm going to get some white paint, and I'm going to spread the white along the top of my canvas. I'm going to get some more white, and I'm going to get a little tiny dot of blue, and I'm going to mix that, and I'm going to fade it into the white. And I am blending them together. And I'm trying to get a sort of a streaky effect between the white and the blue. This is going to be in an effort to create the underwater blue shades. I don't have a reference in my photo for this, but I know from my head and my imagination that the water will be shades of blue. So that is why I am applying a coat of blue paint like this first. And you can have different sort of layers for the way the water will be flowing. And you can have like a textured background like that. And that can look quite nice. It doesn't have to be smooth or one colour or shade all over. You can actually make it different if you like. Now, that's where our plastic is going to come into effect. Plastic is sort of crinkly, like so. So you can see that this crinkled piece of plastic is sort of lifting the paint off, like in a way. That was sellotape. This is softer cellophane, and that can imprint onto the paint. It's lifting the paint up, and when you scrunch the plastic up, it makes little irregular shapes, and that is sort of creating an imprinted texture, which I'm using to represent maybe water. Here's a heavier plastic, like a polythene or something, and it's just a little bit stronger than the previous two plastics. And you can see that pressed on the wet paint also makes an interesting sort of texture for the way the light would catch the water. So I'm going to need to let my paint dry for a while until I can paint on it further. So here is one that I have already prepared, and this is now dry. So what I'm going to start doing is I'm going to use my brush, maybe this sort of size brush, and I'm now going to start looking at the shapes that I can see on my fish. So the fish is mostly yellow, so I'm going to get some yellow paint, and I'm going to get some white paint, and I'm going to try and mix a light yellow colour to match sort of the fish that I see. I could put a tiny little bit of red into that colour to make it a little bit more peachy, or apricot colours, just to kind of look like the fish in the photograph. So I'm going to start off, and I am going to make an oval shape to make my fish. The body shape. Now, the yellow may not cover the blue very well. And if your yellow isn't covering your blue paint that's underneath, you can add white into it, or whatever base color your fish is that you choose. I'm going to draw my tail on my fish. And I'm just painting in a very basic shape first, just to try and get the effect of the, or to represent the outline shape that I see for my fish. I'm not really adding any water into the paint at this stage because I don't want it to be all runny. I'm going to make my fish a little bit longer, and I'm going to make the fin shape now that I can see, and I'm just adding that on in a rectangle shape onto my painting. Draw the fin that's here. And the fin that's there, just with a little brush stroke. Okay. Now I can start to look again a little bit more in a more complex way, and I'm just going to start looking at the different sort of shades of color that I see on this tropical fish, and I can see that there is sort of a lot of pink here on this fin. So I'm going to use now brush marks in pink to try and represent that effect here. This fin is got a rough edge at the end, so I'm going to use a brush to just represent that sort of effect, and I'm layering over. Now I can use my cocktail stick for this part as well, where if I want to draw like a thin line through the fin, that'll actually scratch the wet paint away, and it'll show the detail of the underneath color, which is the blue, which you can see would be coming through on the fish's body. And again, I can see there's color along here. And again, I'm going to scratch away like so. Now, I'm going to add a little bit of blue into my red to make a purple shade, and I will add a little bit of white into that to make it more similar to the colors that I see on my fish's body. And I'm overlapping the colors like so. The paint that I'm using will not maybe necessarily allow me to represent exactly what I see in the painting. So that's okay. You're not going to get an exact color match. I can see there's sort of an orange shape here. So I have an orange shape, but the blending on it is not necessarily very good. So I'm going to use this dry brush to, no, that dry brush is too firm. So I'm going to try and see if I have a softer brush like this. And I'm going to use a soft brush now to try and blend that out a little bit. Use my finger to help to rub it together a little bit. I'm going to wash my brush out. Now, and I'm going to dry it. I don't want to mix water into my paint. I want to keep my paint quite thick. so that I'm actually building up layers of colour. I'm going to use a brush mark now to create the scales that I can see on my fish. And then maybe this smaller brush with the pink paint still on it, I can use that then to also kind of create the scales. Like so. I can see the gills. Now my paint is still quite wet and it's still able to move around a lot for me. And I'm just using lots of little brush marks in different colours to stand out. I'm not wanting this all blended away because I need to be able to see the different brush marks that I can see so that they will mean scales. And if I blend them all away, I can't see that detail. So up close, it's going to look quite kind of rough, but when you're far away from your painting, it's going to look really good because you need a little bit of space away from your picture to be able to see it well. Blend those on there. Okay, so I'm kind of satisfied now with the colours that I have on my fish, and now I'm going to try and paint in the eye detail. So I have a tiny little paintbrush here. It's really quite small, and I'm going to use this now to sort of draw in the fine detail like the mouth. And then maybe the orange of the eye. Might start with a white shape first though, just so that I can mark out where my eye is. And then black dot. And then a little white shine on the eye. And I might use some red. Even though I know I can't see any red, I'm going to put a little bit of a red shape around the eye to make it look like it has shape, so that it can be seen. And I'm going to use this little tiny brush to make little scales and shapes on the head of the fish. Okay, now I can start to get, if I want a little bit creative with maybe adding in details in the underneath part here. If I wanted some coral perhaps, I could maybe use some colours. Okay, so that's gone a kind of green colour. So if I add a little bit more red into it, it'll go more brown. I'm gonna add more yellow in. So I'm trying to create maybe a sand colour. Okay, so there's a sort of a sand, and I'm going to paint that along here. To make the sand, and I could add a bit of more white in to kind of give the sand a little bit more texture. And I'm just lightly brushing over that different shades. If I add in more yellow and white again, I'll get another shade that's slightly different, and I can add that in like so. I can use my cotton bud to add in some bubbles into my background. I'm going to maybe use some orange to paint in some coral shapes where we have some branches of coral. Maybe this fish is a tropical fish, and I could have the coral going in front of. The fish could be hiding in coral. I'm going to add some purple in like that to create some shading on my coral and really build the paint up. I'm really heavily painting that on now because I've put out far too much paint and I want to use it up in a way where I'm not going to waste it. That'll look really good. Again, you don't have to build up your paint like so if you don't have the paint. I'm going to make a nice bright green colour now for maybe another, maybe seaweed. And maybe the seaweed could be going behind the fish to give it just a nice layer of detail. And again, I'm going to add some shading into that by making the green darker in areas, and I can even add it a bit lighter and lime. Like so. I could make up a rock colour. I'll make a grey shade. Maybe a little rock here. Some little pebbles and things. And I'm going to put some kind of light on them by adding some brush stroke over them. And now you can kind of get the overall effect that I have. If you want, you could scratch in little bits of sand with your cocktail stick like this, just to show some shading. You could branch out with your cocktail stick like so. Little finer bits of coral. And that will give you a really nice, interesting underwater painting. Okay, so my best advice when you're painting this would be to break it down into 3 or 4 different stages. So stage 1 would be, again, painting your blue background or your ombre background of another colour, letting it dry. You can bag it before you let it dry, and then you let it dry. Outline your basic fish shape, block it out in one base colour, add white to your paint if it's not covering your blue, let your paint dry, add scales, eyes and extra details that you observe in your photograph, using small brushes of different sizes to create different textures, layering your paint and letting it dry in between stages. And then to finish off your painting, when your fish is dry, then you can add in interest from seaweeds to corals to perhaps even other fish that are smaller or far away in the background of your painting, and rocks and details. just to kind of add a little bit of extra interest or detail. So I hope you have a bit of fun working away at this fish project and you enjoy it. So best of luck and see you guys next week. Bye.